Is tithe to be given only to a church, or can it be given in other ways as an offering to the Lord? What does the Bible say? I'll start with what does the Bible say. And knowing that the question is coming, I marked where I'd like to read from. And this is from 2 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in about verse 7. There's a couple of paragraphs in here that deal with this, 2 Corinthians 9, if you want to read it. But I'll highlight a few verses in hopes to answer the question. Verse 7, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. There are three principles that we talk about as far as tithe goes here at NightChurch, and that is that we would give, the believers of Christ would give of our resources three ways. Regularly, we would be giving on a regular basis. Some people do that weekly, some people do that monthly, some people do that every other week, some people do that as they get paychecks. But that it would be a regular thing that we do. When you give is an open-handed issue, but that you're giving regularly. The second is that the people of God would be giving sacrificially. The story of the widow's mite, where Jesus is observing the rich people coming through, and they're giving out of their abundance to the temple treasury, and they're giving. They've got a ton of money, and they give a lot of money, but they don't feel it. It's not a sacrifice. And then the widow comes through, and she gives 2 pennies, but what she gave was all that she had, and Jesus acknowledges that and calls that worship. So she gave sacrificially. And then the last one is cheerfully, that we would give regularly, sacrificially, and cheerfully. And that's not reluctant, I have to do this because I'm Christian, or I'm guilted into this, but rather I cheerfully give of my resources to the Lord. And so in this New Testament example, money is given for the support of the ministers of the church, so that the ministry of the church can happen. And what the ministry of the church includes is not only the teaching and preaching of the gospel and counsel and other things, church services, but also is a vehicle of taking care of the poor and meeting the needs of our community through this engine, this mechanism called the church. And I know in the Old Testament, do you have a little bit there too?
Yeah.
Why don't you take over there? We can interject later.
All right. I was just going to toss in a little history as well. The Old Testament Numbers, the Lord speaks specifically about some things about the tithe. And just for a little background, tithe is essentially means tenth. So in the law of the Old Testament, it was a tenth of what you made, tenth of what the Lord gave you. And Numbers 18:21 says, to the sons of Levi, and that's the priests of Israel, to the sons of Levi, behold, I have given all the tithe in Israel for an inheritance, in return for their service which they perform, the service of the tenth of meeting. So essentially, this was like the Old Testament church. Levites were like the Old Testament ministers in the church. Can't exactly draw a direct parallel, and but this gives us kind of a jumping off point of what the Lord said in that model. I'd also say beyond that, you really can't draw a direct parallel. If you just back up a little bit, it says the Lord said to Aaron, the father of Levi, from the Levites, he said, you shall have no inheritance in their land, nor own any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the sons of Israel. So technically, if we were drawing a direct parallel, then essentially everyone in ministry would have to live together and not get paid more than the tithe that people give.
So the example breaks down.
Yeah, the example breaks down, but what we have is the original design of God for the money that we as followers of Christ are blessed with, being the thing that supports the people who minister to us, in part being the tithe. There's also I personally think it's very important to support your local church so that they can operate efficiently to meet your needs and the needs of your local community. There are national ministries as well that I think is very important to support. As far as I'm concerned, it's kind of an open hand thing of whether that's part of your tithe or the Old Testament. We talk a lot about tithe in modern church. We don't talk a lot about offerings, and offerings in the Old Testament were above the tenth that the Israelites gave. So sometimes I've been convicted that I'm giving my whatever percent of my income to the church, so I'm doing my job, and the Lord will kind of speak to me about, like, what about this ministry over here? What about this ministry over here?